Hi everyone, my name is Alberto and I'm going to be talking about the Euler buckling lab. So what is Euler buckling? It's a mechanical law that describes how thin a bone's wall can get while still maintaining an animal's weight. It's also a gentle failure model that occurs when tubes are compressed beyond their capacity. So if we consider a stubby tube, it's typically going to collapse and be completely crushed, and it's failing at these extreme loads, while a larger tube is able to fail gradually by slightly bending, and it prevents any major damage to the structure. In this case, we're measuring this based on a bend in the straw and not actual damage to the structure. When we remove the load, it should be able to return to normalcy, and if we push beyond this load, the tube's going to collapse inward at that folding location. So the strength of bones relative to Euler buckling shows that there's a trade-off between strength and mobility. We're comparing the actual weight to how strong the bone is itself. So as it gets heavier and thicker, it's able to handle a larger animal weight, but it's also going to be moving less. And as it becomes less thick, there's more mobility for the animal, but the animal itself has a limit to how heavy it can get. And the thinness of the tube, or in this case the straws, depends on the stiffness of the material, the length of the actual straw, and the thickness of the walls. For animals, the stiffness can't really be altered, so the variable characteristic is the ratio of bone length to bone thickness. And so they're asking themselves this question basically: do I need to be able to carry a massive weight, or do I need to be able to move? And so how would we quantify slenderness, length, and stiffness? Slenderness is quantified by the radius values seen here in the second equation, represented by the outer radius of the column and the inner radius of the column. Length is quantified by L, and the stiffness is quantified by the elastic modulus, which is E in the equation above. And as you can see here, I added all the different variables and the representation of each. For my materials, I used 10 large great value sustainable eco straws, 2 foam pads, a kitchen scale, a pocket knife since I didn't have any scissors on hand, and a ruler. As for my methods, I gathered all the previously listed supplies. I turned on the scale, zeroed it out. I used my pocket knife to create parallel cuts of varying size across the different straws. I measured the length of each individual straw and recorded them on the Excel sheet in millimeters. I went ahead and measured the diameter of each of the straws, took the straw, placed it on a foam pad, one on each end, and then placed it back on the scale. I had to make sure it was perpendicular to the scale before I started adding pressure gradually, using my own body weight by pressing on top of the foam pad. When the straw would bend, I would record that scale reading onto the Excel sheet, and that would be my load value. And I kept repeating this process for the remaining straws. At that point, I determined that the threshold value, my LD value, was about 9. And then I compared my data with another student's, recorded their data into my Excel file, and 2 graphs that were provided adjusted based on this inputted data. And then I went ahead and compared those 2 different graphs. So here are my results. As you can see, my values are up at the top and my partners are on the bottom. I went ahead and did a few more trials just to be able to see if there was a relative stability to the amount of force at failure, which I did find that it pretty much remained in that range of 5,000 to 5,200 grams. And so here we're comparing 2 different types of straws. There's the eco straws that I used and the cocktail straws that she used. And as you can see, mine are able to bear a much lower weight compared to hers. And there's also a clear difference in diameter. As you can see, my diameter is double hers, but I'm also only able to handle half of the force that her straws are able to handle. Even though our LD ratios are pretty much similar at that value of about 8 to 10, our actual force at failure is very different. And here are the 2 graphs that I had mentioned. As you can see, my data is plotted here in the purple. Her data is plotted in the purplish pink. And you can see that my data kind of evens out at that 5,000 mark. And this kept happening as I repeated a few trials that didn't make it onto my actual data sheet. I kept having my straws crush at about that 5,000 to 5,200 gram range. As you can see, my LD ratio for my data turned out to be 9. And Anything above 9 was able to avoid crushing and maintained relative stability afterwards. Although there was a few areas of error, this was mostly due to me not being able to apply weight evenly across the straw. So for one reason or another, I'd apply weight unevenly, and this would actually affect the data, and it would cause the straw to crush. But other than that, for the most part, it maintained a very clear buckle and was still able to be used afterwards. Now, we can see that straws operate differently based on their inherent characteristics. We need to consider the slenderness, the length, and the stiffness of each straw. When we look at these two different types, we can see that there's a clear difference in stiffness. The recycled material in my straws is much weaker than the cocktail straws. Those are a lot harder to bend even by your hand, whereas these recycled materials, you can pretty much snap it by yourself. Now, if we compare this to animal bones, we can see that the LD ratios are potentially going to be larger, but there's a lot more factors we have to consider. But there is still that clear trade-off between stability and mobility. The straws can be seen as proportional to the actual bones, and we see that comparison of thickness to length relative to body size. When we look at this, we see that this trade-off shows that the more body mass you have to carry, the thicker your bones need to be, but you're also going to be moving less. Whereas if you need to be mobile, your bones are typically going to be less thick, but longer compared to your body size. Now, if we take, say, a kangaroo rat and compare it to an elephant, we can see that the kangaroo rat bones are longer compared to body size than the elephant's. But the elephant has much thicker bones. They're also living two completely different lifestyles. One is much less mobile than the other. The kangaroo rat needs to stay moving, whereas the elephant is able to move at a much slower pace, but it has to be able to maintain that relatively high body weight. And these here are my references. Thank you.